This week's parsha, Chaya, in Perach Daled, in chapter 24, discusses Avram's mission to find a wife for his son Yitzchak, and he sends Eliezer. So the pasuk says, "V'Avram zakin ba bayamim, v'Hashem beirach es Avram bakol." So before before Avram calls in Eliezer to go to send him out to look for a wife for Yitzchak, the Torah seems to have a pasuk not really related. What's the connection of Avram zakin ba bayamim? That Avram is old, and Hashem beirach es Avram bakol. So actually, they're different mafarshim. I think it's in the Tziv. Some write Avram zakin, since Avram was old, he couldn't do the mitzvah himself. He could go ahead and walk back to his hometown to find a wife for his son, to find a daughter-in-law, so he had to send someone else. Others say, interesting, also halachic, V'Avram zakin ba bayam, and the focus is on the end of the pasuk. V'Hashem beirach es Avram bakol. What does it mean, God blessed Avram with bakol, everything? So one opinion is a daughter. So why is that relevant now? He just had a daughter, now vayoma Avram al abdo. So some point out there's a halacha that, let's say, the father hasn't fulfilled Pru Revu yet, but he has a son also has to get married and fulfill Pru Revu. And we'll get into that shortly. What is the mitzvah? Is there a mitzvah of Kedushin or Pru Revu? So they point out that who gets precedence? The halacha is, first, the father works on his own mitzvah. He fulfills his own mitzvah, Pru, has a boy and a girl. And afterwards, he can start working on marriage for his child. So that's what the pasuk's telling me. Hashem beirach es Avram bakol. Now that Avram already fulfilled his mitzvah, he had Yitzchak and now he had a girl. And that's the way we paskin, that one has, minimally speaking, you have to have a boy and a girl to fulfill Pru Revu. So then he went ahead now, and Vayom Avram al Avdo, the Kanbeso, promise me you're going to not take a woman from the Nos Kanani, but I want you to go to my hometown. So, why was Avram so concerned? Like, they were Ovdei Avodah Zarah everywhere. The idol worshippers in his hometown, and they were idol worshippers in Kanani. So why was Avram so insistent? Don't take one from the Nos Kanani. So that's the famous Ran, that both places were Avodah Zarah, but Avodah Zarah is basically an intellectual perversion, and hence it can be fixed, it can be remedied. But a lack of morality, ethics, and modesty affects a person's entire nature, and it disqualifies a woman from being a maid of an Isaac. In other words, the Ran says that the importance of midos tovos. That of course, you want someone with a similar hashkafa as well, but the point being is, you could change someone's hashkafa. It's intellectual, their outlook. You just have to educate them. But midos roles, but bad characteristic traits, bad person, that's much harder to change. As Rabbi Salanta used to say, it's harder to change one bad midah, one bad characteristic trait, than it is to go through the whole Shas, all the Gemaras. And it's not because it's easy to go through all of Shas, but it's much harder to change a bad midah. And that's why he said, I want you to go back to my hometown. It's true that idol worshippers, everyone is, but they have good midos, and that's what you have to look for in a spouse. And in fact, that's why some say it says Noach ish tzaddik. First he was an ish. In order, before you become a tzaddik, you have to become an ish first. You have to focus on being a mensch, on your ben adam lechavero. Follow the others around, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and learn how to become a mensch. So that's why his concern wasn't Avodah Zarah, because there were Avodah Zarah anywhere. But he had to find someone who was a Baal Midas. In fact, and besides that reason, the Mefarshim point out that in life also you have to, when you're looking for a spouse, you have to find someone a good balance. You can't have someone just like you, and you can't have someone polar opposites. So you have to have, so therefore, and if you have one extreme, you have to have someone for the balance. So that's what some point out, that why is the Torah focusing, why were they looking for the chesed of RIVKA? Because Yitzchak was din, and therefore you had to have someone who focused on chesed, because that wasn't his midah, was more din. So therefore they wanted to have a proper balance between the two. So we see the parasha talks about, spends many, I think 60 psukim on Abraham speaking to Eliezer for a shidduch. And then we find also, that's question number one. Question number two, at the end of the parasha, it talks about all the different children of Yishmael. And in the Haftorah, it talks about David on his deathbed telling his son Shlomo, this is what you have to do. Basically, these are the people you reward, these are the people you punish. What is the common themes? So Rav Selevan used to always say over, what is the theme of all these things is, Avram's whole life was spreading ethical monotheism, being a man, spreading good midos. He wanted to create a legacy. He didn't want it to end right there. So he had to ensure, in order for Yitzchak to be able to continue the legacy, he had to find someone who was a Baal Chesed, a Baal Chesed. He had to find someone like RIVKA. He didn't want his legacy to end here. And similarly, that's why when it comes to Yishmael, it's just about having children. So once the contrast, Yishmael just having children, to Avram, no, it's not enough just to have kids. You have to have the appropriate children who could give over the Masorah, the tradition. And that's what in the Haftorah, that's what David is telling his son Shlomo, make sure you continue the Masorah, rewarding the good and punishing the bad. And that's what we see, that it's important to continue one's legacy, and that's why it's called Chaya Sarah, the life of Sarah. Because even though it's the death of Sarah, but tzadikim b'misasa nikra chayim, righteous people, even after they're living, even after they're dead, they consider living, because the legacy lives on. And that's the psal we say in the davening on Rosh Hashanah, that we open up the Sifrei Chayim and the Sifrei Meisim are open. The books of the living and the books of the dead are open. What are the books of the living? The books of the living being open, we understand. You have to just live the year, you have to review. But someone who's been dead for 20 years, why do you have to review? So the answer is because he also could have an impact now. The legacy he left still continues. He could be rewarded for things that he did 20 years ago. So that's what the focus is, or the Rav points out, the 60 psukim, we focus on the shidduch. We want to point out how important it was to Avram to continue the legacy, in contrast to Yishmael, where it's just a matter of having the kids, and that's where the Haftorah continues on this theme, that David giving over the Masorah to Shlomo. So we see this parasha talks about the mitzvah of getting married. It talks about marriage. So let's discuss a little bit, is there a mitzvah of marriage in the Torah? We know it's called Kiddushin. And when you do a marriage, we have Kiddushin. It's Kiddushin and Nisuin. We have the Kiddushin. It's engagement, but it's not really engagement. When you do Kiddushin, you're married, and if you break it off, you need a get. You need a divorce. So it's not the same engagement as it is today. So the Rambam writes, there's a mitzvah of Kiddushin, that we know there's a mitzvah of having children, and the Rambam writes there's also a mitzvah of getting married. And other Rishonim, the Rosh and the Ran, they say there's no mitzvah of Kiddushin per se. The mitzvah is having children. How do you have children? You have to get married. But strictly speaking, if you had kids out of marriage, you could also fulfill the mitzvah of pruerville, being fruitful and multiplied. So in fact, so we could see by the nature of the bracha under the chuppah. There's a bracha we make a boy priya gafen, and then also the Masada Kiddushin, the one who is doing the wedding, doesn't have to be a rabbi, usually it is, he makes the blessings under the chuppah. So he makes the bracha Borei Pri Hagafen. He makes the bracha over the wine, and then he makes the bracha, he makes the Birchas Kedushin. Let's see if I can find it. So he makes the Borei Pri Hagafen under the chuppah, and then he makes the bracha about the wedding. Asher also lanu as arusas, v'hitu lanu as azulas eidei chuppah v'kedushin. Okay, here it is. So the bracha is Borei Pri Hagafen. Then he says, Asher kedishal v'mitzosa v'tzivanu al harayis. He forbade us, he commanded us regarding forbidden unions. V'asa lanu es harusos, who forbade betrothed women to us. V'hitu lanu es hanesuos. So that's the bracha. So the Rush and Ksuvis, the Gemara in Ksuvis in the beginning has a whole lengthy discussion on it. The Rush writes, why don't we just say the normal text? Asher Kedishano b'mitzvosa b'tzivano al mitzvahs kedushin, or l'kadosh isha. Why do we have this whole long text about talking about the forbidden unions of Arayas, Arusa? So the Rush concludes that this is a Birchas Shavach V'Hodah. We know that 3 categories of brachas. There are more, but the basic 3 categories of brachas are a bracha on a mitzvah. You do a bracha before a mitzvah. A Birchas Shavach V'Hodah, it's praise of God. And a Birchas Hanenin, a bracha you make before you eat. So, what type of bracha is this? Is this a Birchas HaMitzvah or a Birchas Shavach V'Hodah? So the Rush writes, this is a bracha on the institution of marriage, of praising God. Because apparently the Rush holds there is no mitzvah of Kedushin, and therefore you can't say it's a Birchas HaMitzvah. So therefore it must be, and it's not the classical text of this getting married. It has a whole long discussion. It goes through Sivano al Rayis, or also as Arusa, so it must be, it's a Birchas Shavach V'Hodah, it's a blessing of praise and thanksgiving. And the Rambam disagrees. The Rambam writes Kedushin is a mitzvah. So it's a fundamental machlokes, the Rambam and the Rush, whether the mitzvah, whether Kedushin is a mitzvah, or whether it's a Birchas Shavach V'Hodah. In other words, do we view this bracha we're making as a Birchas HaMitzvah or Birchas Shavach V'Hodah? My nafkamina, what's the practical difference? Either way, we make this blessing under the chuppah. What's the difference if I say it's classified as a Birchas HaMitzvah or whether it's classified as a Birchas Shavach V'Hodah? So what are some normal So one usual difference is, as the Gemara tells us in Psachim Adav Zayin, if it's a Birchas HaMitzvah, so first we make the bracha and then we do the mitzvah. And that's what the Rambam writes. First you make the bracha and then we do the mitzvah of Kedushin. However, it's the Birchas Shavach V'Hodah, so then it doesn't have to be before. In fact, maybe it's better to make it after. After you have the wedding, the marriage, you're thanking God on the institution of marriage. So it seems to be a dispute between the Rush and the Rambam, whether it's the Birchas HaMitzvah, Birchas Shavach V'Hodah, and therefore, not the practical difference whether you make the bracha before or after. However, there seems to be an interesting opinion of the Ravid. The Ravid says it's a Birchas HaMitzvah like the Rambam, yet he says you make the bracha afterwards. So how do we explain the opinion of the Ravid? Bishlom of the Rambam, it's a Birchas HaMitzvah, you make the bracha before, and then you do the Kedushin. And according to the Rush, it's a Birchas Shavach V'Hodah, you get through the wedding, and then you make the bracha. But according to the Ravid, if it's a Birchas HaMitzvah, you should make it before, like all Birchas HaMitzvahs. Why does the Ravid say here, it's a Birchas HaMitzvah, but you make it afterwards? So, the commentators explain, because we have another principle in Hilchos Brachas. In fact, there's a famous kasha of the Tshuvas HaRashba, among others. We know we make blessings on biblical mitzvahs, on rabbinical mitzvahs, and even customs. Hallel So biblical mitzvahs we make on tefillin, on Rabbanan, on Chanukah, on customs, to Hallel, half Hallel we say on Rosh Chodesh. So tzedakah is a biblical mitzvah. So the question the Rashba asks, why don't we make a bracha on tzedakah? It's a biblical mitzvah. So the famous answer of the Rashba is, since perhaps the ani, different ways of understanding the Rashba, since we're concerned the ani won't accept the money, he'll say he wants more, or it's no good, whatever the issue is, you end up making a bracha, it'll be a blessing in vain, and therefore you don't make the bracha, therefore you don't make a bracha on tzedakah. Because any mitzvah which is dependent on someone else, you don't make a bracha. So therefore it's dependent on others. There are other reasons also, but that's the reason of the Rashba. So the Ravid says here, it's true here is a Birkas HaMitzvah, but who says the woman's going to accept? It's dependent on someone else. Kiddushin, we'll see, even the Rambam agrees, even though it's a mitzvah b'adam u'makom, because the Rambam's opinion is the reason why you don't make brachas you don't make blessings on ben adam l'chavero, an interpersonal mitzvah. So the fact that the Rambam says you make a bracha, it shows the Otz Kiddushin is a mitzvah b'adam l'makom, the community between man and God. Of course it affects people, but it's fundamentally a mitzvah b'adam l'makom. So the Rambam, the Ravid says you should make the bracha afterwards because it's like tzedakah. It's dependent on someone else. That any mitzvah is dependent on someone else, you can't make the bracha before. So how come I tzedakah, you don't make a bracha at all? Even afterwards, by tzedakah, let's make the bracha afterwards, just like we do by Kiddushin. So the answer is because there are many other reasons why we don't make a bracha on tzedakah. Either because it's a mitzvah, but adam l'chaver, like the Rambam writes, or it's a mitzvah that everyone does, even non-Jews do, and perhaps it's a whole separate discussion on non-Jews obligated in the mitzvah of tzedakah. But since there are other reasons why we don't make a bracha on tzedakah, so therefore we don't make a bracha after we give tzedakah. But based on this reason alone, we would make a bracha on tzedakah afterwards, and that's what the Rabbi writes here. You would make a bracha, you make the bracha afterwards, and therefore, so according to the Rosh, we understand why you have a non-normative bracha. You make a bracha v'tzivanu al rayis v'asavanu sarusas. But according, because it's a birka shavach v'hodah. But according to the Rambam, why don't we just make the bracha on mitzvahs kedushin? So perhaps that's what the Rambam is getting at. That it's not just a regular. The mitzvah of kedushin is different by a Jew. That because we know we don't make a bracha on something which it could be done by non-Jews, and that's what the Gemara goes into the history. They chuppah v'kedushin. We know chuppah happens after kedushin, but as Rav Moshe Soloveitchik explains, historically speaking, that's how you used to get married. You just take a woman and you did your chuppah, and then later on, when at Har Sinai we got the mitzvah of kedushin. So even though you must be bothered. Why are we making a bracha on the mitzvah of Kiddushin? I Goyim get married. That's what the Rambam says. The bracha goes into the uniqueness of the Jewish people. And that's why, that's why even though the Rambam holds it's a birkas a mitzvah, you go ahead and make the bracha because we're emphasizing the uniqueness of the Jewish people. It's not just chuppah. It's not this pogei ish b'shuk like it used to be, but now it's a holy ceremony. We do the kiddushin, and we prepare ourselves for marriage. That's a three-way machlokes. The fundamental machlokes, Rambam and the Rosh, whether you make the bracha after the marriage or before. According to the Rambam, before, because it's a birkas mitzvah. According to the Rosh, you make it afterwards because it's going on the institution of marriage. And the Rabbi has an interesting split. It's a birkas mitzvah, but we make the bracha afterwards is because we want to make sure the woman accepts. And any mitzvah that's dependent on someone else, you have to make a bracha. Why the crazy text? Why not the normal text of Al Mitzvah's Kedushin? Because the question is, how could you make a bracha on something everyone else does? So the bracha is showing the uniqueness that the mitzvah of Kedushin is different by Jews than it is by non-Jews, and hence the Torah goes, hence the bracha emphasizes it to explain that's why we can make this bracha.